Okay, hi everybody. In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how we can take a 3D model. In this case, I'm using the same library monomer from the Borges tutorial and add textures to it and render it out to images, and which will later move on to rendering out to animations. So the most important part of this tutorial is showing how we can go from the this kind of gray, slightly abstract polygon form to simply applying a bunch of in this case photographic texture maps that all of a sudden will transform our 3D model into something that is a little bit more recognizable. And I'll go to some images that I've rendered out. Without the background, once it's been rendered properly, even with some very simple lighting, we can get some quite pleasing and somewhat realistic rendered effects on the model. There's a lot we could do to make this look better, but I'm just giving you the very basic principles in this video, and you can sort of experiment and take them further as we go through the course. And obviously we can render this onto a background or use a background image within Blender, as I've done here. Or in this case, I've rendered out the form with a transparent background, so we could layer this on top of any other piece of footage or any other image. And the same is true if I reveal the modifiers again. We can do all sorts of stuff just with the materials we have from the previous tutorial. So what I want to do in this tutorial is show you how to go from the unshaded, untextured mode, show you how to render out a basic image, and then show you how to get a texture like this applied properly, so the bricks are facing the right way and they sort of connect with each other as they wrap around an edge, and so on and so on. Okay, so I'll just open up another file which should be closer to where you're up to. I think that should be right. Okay, so if you followed along with the previous tutorial, your model should look something like this. This was the torus made from the Library of Babylon. Now, first of all, I'll just go into the modifiers panel and I'll turn off all the modifiers, and I'll also turn off these blue squares with the camera on them, which is saying that they can be seen in the render view, whereas this is saying it can be seen in the viewport. So we'll turn both of those off, and we'll just get back to our monomer library sort of hexagon chamber here. So the first thing I'll show you very quickly is just how to add a color and render out an image. And if we're just adding a color, it's really quite quick. So I'll go into the shading tab, which is in the top menu of tabs here. It hasn't changed the functionality of Blender, it's just given me some different windows that are more suitable for these operations. And first of all, I'm going to add a new material. So I can either add that here, where it says new, or I can go into the materials tab and do the exact same thing. So I'll add a material, and by default, it's given me what's called a principled BSDF shader. And that's something that's kind of new to Blender. I think it came out a year or so ago, and it's a really great sort of multifunctional, what we call a shader that has a lot of different settings that we can do a huge number of things with without having to do any of the complex building of shading networks that would have been required a few years ago. So so just to apply basic color, first I'll grab this material and I'll just name it library simple color, and I can check that it's on the material. If I click on the material and the shader is still there, then if I click on my NURB circle, it doesn't have a material on it. If I click on this polygon, it's got the material. So to change the color, very simply, I click on base color, and I don't know, let's make it pink, and boom, we've got a nice pink library monomer. Now, if I wanted to render out that simply exactly as it is right now, then I would go into the animation tab, which changes the configuration of our workspace again, and I have to make sure that there's a camera pointing at my object, because the camera is what will record, what perspective we're making our images from. So by default, there's a camera in the scene. Every time you start a new scene in Blender, it puts in a camera. So I'll use that camera, and I'll press N to bring up the transform menu, and I'll just reset all of these to 0. So now you can see my camera. I can reset these. A little tip: if you hold your mouse over the transform parameters and press delete, it actually just resets all of them. So it's a nice little trick. But okay, so if I want my camera to look at this object, and this over here is what the camera is seeing, I can rotate. Maybe I'll first rotate the camera on the x-axis, and then rotate the camera on the z-axis, and then I'll move it, grab it on the x-axis, and I'll move it back. And now we can see something happening in the left-hand window. If I grab it on the z-axis and move it up, and you can sort of see what I'm doing. I'm just framing, grab on the y, grab on the x, and you can see that now, grab on the z, and now I'll have to rotate on the y to point it down. Now we can see that the object is in frame. Another way to do this is to hover over this window and press N and bring up the transform menu, and you can actually go into the view tab and click lock camera to view, and now that means as I move my perspective around as I would in the viewport, just with the middle mouse button, the zoom, and shift and middle mouse to pan, we're actually, if you look here, we're moving the camera at the same time. So that's also kind of a quick and convenient way to set up a frame. So this looks pretty good to me. So to do a quick render, I want you to make sure that your render engine, so if you look on the left hand tab here, right up the top, render engine is set to Eevee. Now, a render engine is the part of the software that does the rendering calculations for every image. And some of them are faster, some of them are slower, and they have different purposes. Eevee is what's known as a real-time rendering engine. So real-time means that it essentially renders at the same speed that we'd be viewing something. That's basically how computer games work. They have real-time rendering, as in everything that you see on the screen is being computed as you're seeing it. Whereas Cycles is a fully photorealistic ray tracing engine that's a lot slower, but has a lot more sort of functionality and precision. But because I assume you're at home on laptops and not on the great computers at school, I'll do a bunch of rendering in Eevee, and I'll do some in Cycles as well, just to show you the difference. But okay, so we've got our material applied already. So I'll just go up into Render and click Render Image. Let's see what happens. Okay, great. So, it's not the most interesting thing in the world, but there it is. There's our library monomer that's pink. So a few things we can change early on. If you want to save this image, of course you can. Image, save as, and just save it wherever you like. A few things that we would like to that I think we should change would be the lighting. Like I'll just show you that image again. The lighting here is terrible. We can barely see what's happening on this side of the model, and it's really blown out on the top of the model here. So if I go into the rendered view in my viewport, we can see what's happening with the lighting here, that we've got quite a lot of light on one side, none on the other. So I'll do some very simple lighting now. Maybe we'll do a proper tutorial on lighting later, but I'll just delete the light that's there. And I'm going to add in some very sort of simple lights. I'm actually going to use suns. If I add in a sun here, what a sun does is it just, it works like the sun. It shoots rays of light all in the exact same direction, sort of with a high degree of consistency, rather than like a flashlight, which would have a cone of light and then it would fall off as it gets further away. A sunlight, I'll just grab that up. It actually doesn't matter where it is in the scene, it's just going to shine light in that direction. So if I rotate this on the y-axis, you can see that it's changing the direction that these shadows are cast. So there we have one light again, but actually we're going to add a second light on the back side just to make sure that the shadows aren't completely dim. And anybody who's done photography or film will know about this already. We're going to do what's called a 3-point light setup, where this first light, which I'm going to rename Sun Key, is our key light. The second light, I'll just duplicate that, is going to be called Sun Fill, and the fill light is just going to do exactly what it suggests. It's going to fill in these shadows a bit. So I'll rotate the light on the y-axis, and now we're getting light on the other side. But in the light tab here, second from the bottom, when you have a light selected, this light tab will appear. So, you know, if I have my monomer selected, the light tab's gone, but if I have my light selected, the tab's here. I'm just going to turn the strength of, and I'll leave the key light at 1, but I'll select the fill light and change, and I'll drop it down pretty low. I'll drop it down to like 0.2, just so it's giving a little bit of light on the back there. And, you know, just to stick with tradition, let's add in a an edge light, it makes a lot more sense in cinema, and perhaps I'll describe this in a lecture, but an edge light, if this was a person, you know, the back of their head might still be lost in shadow, so an edge light just is set very, very low, but usually gives a tiny bit of light coming from behind the model. So I'll put that in just so you can see what I mean. Now I'll just reset these transforms, grab it up, and I'll rotate it a little bit on the x-axis, and I'll have it set very, very low, 0.01. So now let's render this image again. And okay, that's already looking a bit better. You know, we can see a variation in tones here, but okay, look, it's still very, very simple. It's still essentially a flat material. Now, before we go into texturing, I'll just show you the difference when we make a few small changes and move into the cycles render engine. So in my material, I'm just going to, go into the shading menu, click on my material, and I'm going to just change the roughness. Now, roughness is a fascinating property. Roughness is really talking about reflection. If we turn the roughness down to 0, that basically makes it a mirror. You know, a mirror is something that essentially reflects all of the light back that is hitting it. If we turn the roughness up to 1, that makes it completely matte. No gloss whatsoever, no reflectivity. It's a very dull looking surface. So if I turn the roughness not all the way down, but you know, quite a fair way down, and then I'll just change the render engine to cycles, already we should get a reasonably different looking image, and you'll notice that it's going to be a lot slower to render. So now that cycles is rendering it, it might take, you know, it might take a minute, it might take, I don't know, you know, it really depends on how fast your computer is. And this is where, when you hear people talking about you know, having really good computers for animation, a lot of the time it might be, sure, it might be how many polygons it can display on screen whilst you're editing, but really the real oomph comes from when you can see the big difference in render speeds. So if I rendered this on my rendering PC, this an image like this will probably be done in a few seconds. But as I'm doing this on my laptop, you know, it's going to take how long? It's telling us up the top, it's taking, yeah, it looks like it'll take almost a minute. So you should already be able to see that the lighting is starting to look a little bit more sophisticated, you know, and I might even, what I'll do now, I'll just add in an environment image, so we'll see a bunch more reflections, and then I'll get into showing you how to wrap that brick texture on. Okay, so I'll just, maybe I'll keep that image there, and I'll move into the next image slot. Just, you know, these slots can help you. If you want to test out a bunch of different parameters, you can re-render the image in a different slot and you know, see how your differences are functioning. Okay, so to add in an environment image, you know, just that photographic background I use sometimes, I go into the World tab, which is sort of about 2/3 of the way up. And here where it says Surface and Color, I'm just going to click on that circle next to Color, and I'll click Environment Texture, and I'll have to open a texture, and I'm going to use my Winter Forest texture. And I'll upload a few open source textures like this for you to the Moodle for you to use. But you can also download them from a bunch of websites, and maybe I'll put them in the description of this video. Okay, so now if I render my image, I might make the roughness even lower, just so we can see what all of these changes whilst we're using the Cycles rendering engine should do. So I'll render that again, this time in slot number 2, and let's see what we get. Okay, so now what's going on in this image is there's actually 4 sources of light. We have those lights we set up before, but this image is giving a little bit of light to the object. And I'll make one more change. I'll do this in slot 3 now. I'm going to change the metallic of the object from 0 to 1. And now if I render this image, we should see a whole lot more reflectivity on this surface. Let's just render this now, and I'll have to cut the video to not bore you with the render time, but okay. Okay guys, so now that that render's done, you can see that just with changing a few properties, we can, have some quite fun effects going on with our image. Now this has, I don't know, some sort of like 1980s futuristic chrome metal thing going on. And if we go back to slot 1, you can see a lot has changed since we switched to the Cycles renderer and changed our object properties to metallic. That, we haven't done any texturing yet, but just by altering the properties in the shading material and rendering with the Cycles renderer, we can start to do quite a lot of fun stuff. But okay, so what I want to do now is move on to actually adding that brick texture to the image. And sorry to say that's going to take a little bit longer, but that's okay. You can pause this video and come back to it whenever you like. But okay, so I'm going to remove this material. Easiest way to do that, I'll just go to the Material tab and hit minus. So when I've done that, the material actually still exists. If I minus it that way, I can still reset it. But I want to remove it because I'm going to add a new material. And this material, I'll just go back into, look, dev mode's okay, but I'll go back into the Eevee renderer. This material, we're going to add what's called a UV checking material. So for that reason, I'll call this UV checker. And a UV checking material, I'll show you, is going to tell us how a photograph or an image can be mapped onto these polygon surfaces. Because right now, Blender doesn't know exactly where it should put an image if we ask us to put an image here. I'll show you what I mean. If I grab the brick texture that, that I've been using, I'll go, actually maybe I'll show you how to do that properly. I've gone, whoops, why is that not working? Okay, X, okay. I'm going to go Shift A, and where are we? Image texture should be in Texture, Image Texture. And if I connect the color to the base color here, so at the moment there's no texture here, so nothing's showing up. If I hit open, and this is where I've been keeping my image textures, but we'll get to that later, and I grab the brick texture that I've been using, you'll see that it'll probably look terrible when it shows up. It doesn't seem to be showing up at all yet. Okay, maybe, okay, right, so not only terrible, it doesn't even exist yet. If I go into render, do we have, yeah, okay. So can't even wrap that texture on at all yet. And the reason for that is that we haven't done what's called UV unwrapping of this image. So Blender has no idea how to put the textures onto this shape. So the first thing I'll do is I'm going to go into UV editing, And so at the moment, because I've been using that brick texture, this is the texture that Blender is trying to wrap onto the shape. But just to demonstrate the problem, now if I hit, if what I need to do is to UV unwrap this this shape. Once I automatically unwrap it, Blender will still have a little bit of trouble knowing, you know, which direction to wrap this brick texture onto. Think about it sort of like, it's going to be like unwrapping a Christmas present, but I'll show you what I mean. So to UV unwrap an image, I've gone into the UV editing tab and I've gone into edit mode, and I'm going to press A to select all the faces, U to unwrap, and I'm going to use the cube projection. And what that's done is it's basically pointed a kind of a camera at this model from 6 directions, you know, from the face of a cube, and it's produced what we call UVs. So if I just draw a box here and hit G, it's made all these shapes that these are what's called UVs, that are 2-dimensional shapes that represent every single face of the object and tells Blender how to apply this texture to this object. But if I go into look dev mode, we'll see that automatically, yeah, it's got some of them right. Some of them are facing the correct direction. Some of them, you know, the obvious problem should be that things are probably not joining up especially well. Actually hasn't done such a bad job. Hasn't done a bad job at all. Okay, so Blender's automatic wrapping has done, you know, actually quite an excellent job of getting all of our textures already facing the correct direction. But what's happening up there? Okay, we've got a few that are a bit weird. This one up here is sort of rotated in a strange direction, as is this one. We can see that those bricks there are sort of, they're in line shooting down from here, but they're not in line with how the building should function. So okay, it's pretty good, but you know, certainly not perfect. What we're going to do now is I'm going to show you how to manipulate all of these UVs. Even though the automatic job has actually done a great job, I'm going to show you how to manipulate these UVs and move them around yourself so that you can have a lot of control over the way that your texture is mapped onto the object. So if I'm in edit mode and I've got all my faces selected by pressing A, I can access all of the UVs here, and you'll see that if I move them around on the UV space, it changes where they are in the object space. So I'm just going to get all of these nice and ordered so that you know, especially if we wanted to have different features on different parts of the building, we'd really want to have a lot more control than this over where everything is. So we're just going to kind of clean this up a bit so that we can have complete control over our texture. Okay, so much like edit mode when we're 3D modeling, we can select our UVs according to vertex, which will just give us the vertex of a UV here, and right click to undo. Edge, same thing, and face, and also we have this one, island. And island can be a whole bunch of faces that are sort of connected together. And we're going to turn a bunch of these different areas into islands that all connect together. So I've moved them off the brick space here just so that I can kind of, you know, see what I'm doing. And what I'm going to do is just separate them all out a bit. And I just want to get them in a nice order so that, you know, I can see what I'm doing. And usually you can work out which one is which, because as you move it in the UV space, you'll see the texture on the right hand side moving. If you don't see the texture, that might mean you're in solid mode or something. Just make sure, press Z and go into look dev, which will show you a preview of the texture, and hit tab and make sure you've got all the faces selected, and that will in the left hand side reveal all of the UVs to you. Okay, so I'll just separate these out a bit. I'll just see which. Okay, so I'm going to put the outside textures at the top, and I'll put which one's this? Probably one of the doors. Okay, so that's from the same outside. I'll put all the outside ones in one line, and I'll just get them all joined together so that they're all kind of linked. Oh, and there's one other thing I forgot to do. Okay, the reason I put on this brick texture was I wanted to show you immediately how Blender would start mapping the textures. But when we're texture mapping, it's actually better to use a specific UV checking material that can really show us what's going on. So I'll just go back into my shading menu, and I'm going to change this brick pattern. Instead, I'm going to use my UV checking pattern, and I'll upload some basic free textures for you to use into the Moodle, but you can also find them online. Okay, so if I go into my textures folder, get my UV texture checker, and okay, so with a material like this, now we can see a whole lot more stuff that's going on that we couldn't see with the brick texture. For example, this face here, because we've got numbers and letters, you can see that actually it's been flipped around, it's reversed. But when we were looking at the bricks, we couldn't see that. Same over here, and same over here. Okay, so Blender did a great job of texture mapping, but you know, there's a lot that we'd want to change, especially if we want to customize our texture setup. So let's go back into UV editing, and I'll just go back to lining up all these textures. And guys, this is going to be a slow process, slow, a bit repetitive, but you know, that's just what UV unwrapping is. And once you get the hang of it, I usually listen to the radio or something while I do this, because it's, you know, pretty slow, pretty repetitive, but it's just, you know, something that you've got to do if you want your textures to be aligned correctly. So I'm just kind of spacing them all out into some order so I know what each face is, and that to me, that just makes it a bit quicker to sort of sew them all together. And okay, so as I said before, I'm putting all of the ones in this row are the textures that are going around the outside walls, and then all of the ones in this row are the ones that are going around the inside walls, etc., etc. Okay. Okay. Now this, I'm guessing, has got to be the floor. Yep, I'll put that right down the bottom. It's probably another outside wall. Where are you? Maybe it's one of the ones down the bottom. Oh, okay. Right, another thing I forgot. So, from the tutorial, the last tutorial, I think you noticed at the end that I found there were a bunch of extra faces, and that was because we didn't do a merging operation when something in our merging operation with our initial array modifier went a bit wrong, and we've got a bunch of extra faces here. But, you know, when you're doing texturing, often it's a way to find a bunch of little mistakes that you left in your file, because when you're going through all the UVs, often you find all sorts of little errors. So, you know, it can be a good opportunity to get them all fixed up. So in face mode, I'm going to just delete all these extra faces that are hiding inside my model that shouldn't be there. And that was probably from very early on when we duplicated our hexagon mesh. So I'll just hit X and delete faces, and yeah, there's 2 layers of them. Okay, X, delete faces. Okay, is that it? That makes a bit more sense now. Okay, so that's better. All right, so now I'll press A again, and I'll go back to just organizing these rows of faces. And there'll be a few keyboard shortcuts that you're going to get to use a lot. Basically, I'm just left clicking on these faces and pressing G to grab them. Okay, so that I can see is this face at the front here. I'm just kind of getting them all in a convenient order. Where's this one? Ah, that's on the inside, so I'll leave it in this row. That's probably on the inside as well somewhere. Yep, on the inside as well. Okay, so that's on the level below. I'll put that down here. Guessing that probably is too. What's this one. Yep. Same one down here. Yep, I can see that that is just in here. Okay, so we're almost there. Where is this one? Maybe it's on the outside. Yep, on the outside. That looks like it's in the door, actually. I think that's one of our door frame faces. Yep. Okay, so I'll just put my door frame. I might just grab all of these, move them down, and I'll put my door here so I know where it is. I'm guessing that's what all these little ones are as well. Yep. Maybe this one here. Yep, that's that one. And that's probably the one up in the door frame. Yep. And this one is, okay, near the entrance. Okay, that's getting us about there. Now, what about this guy? Is that on the top somewhere? No. Where's that face? Okay, also on the outside. And this one, perhaps it's on this side. Yeah. Okay. What else? Yep, okay, so because it's projected from the top, see this shape here? That's really just Blender looking straight down and getting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 faces here. But of course in the model, we don't want them mapping or connecting directly to each other because when seen from the top, it's ignoring everything else that's happening in the third dimension. So these textures, if these textures are up here, I'm probably going to connect them to this inner ring here. So I'll just bring them over here. I'm not exactly sure where they go yet, but we'll work that out. And I'll just shift select 1 and 2, G for grab, bring them up here. And then these ground textures, I'll just leave them where they are. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is just sort of sew these all together so that all of this is in one island and all of this is in one island, etc., rather than being disconnected. Because what we want is we want all of these edges to be connected to each other so that when it wraps around the texture, that the texture kind of connects in between different faces. That's really the whole sort of point of UV unwrapping, is to make the texture connect where you want it to connect, and if there are any points where there has to be something that doesn't quite connect, to have it be somewhere where it doesn't matter so much. So this is where the aspect of UV unwrapping is like wrapping a Christmas present. You know, at some point there has to be a cut in the paper, or think of it like peeling an orange or something, you know, that it's to unwrap a curved surface onto a flat surface will always involve some sort of cuts or stretching and stuff like that. So that's what we're doing here. We're unwrapping a two-dimensional shape from our three-dimensional shape, and you know, think of texturing as wrapping up a present for someone with colored wrapping paper or something like that. Okay, so what we want to do now is, with these edges, I want to sew them together. Now, there's a key shortcut for sewing edges, which is V. If I press V, now I've got some snapping on. So if I just press S, no, okay, V. Now what snapping do I have? There's some option here that I need to change. I just need to remember what it is. Okay, maybe it's the limit. Okay, just a moment. I just need to work out exactly what I've got to change. Perhaps it's my stitching options here. If I turn off use limit and now press V, no. Snap islands, maybe that's what I need. No. Oh, okay, now I've remembered there's another little error here that we need to fix. Okay, so one of the errors that I found when I was just UV unwrapping this in my own time is that I'll just go back into shaded mode and press 1 to go into vertex mode. Another merging operation we didn't do was with these vertexes that, hold on, what have I got? Oh, turn snapping off. If I grab this vertex you'll see that this vertex is not connected to the one next to it. And this is another reason why UV unwrapping can be kind of handy, that if we've made a mistake in our model, we'll often find it when we're UV unwrapping. So, whereas this one should be okay, see how all those edges are connected to one another. Whereas here, we've actually got two vertexes sitting right on top of one another. And that's why when I went to sew these edges together, Blender didn't even recognize this as a shared edge, because in actual fact, hold on, there's two edges sitting right on top of one another. So let's fix that up now. It's a nice excuse for some troubleshooting. So I've gone into wireframe mode by pressing Z and going to wireframe. I'll press 1 to go into vertex select. And because I know those vertexes are sitting right on top of one another, I'll just draw a little box, and then I'll hit Option if you're on a Mac and Alt if you're on a PC, Alt M, and merge at center. So now if I go back into shaded mode and grab this vertex, there's just one there now and everything's connected together. And so there's probably a few parts of our model that inherited that error, and that was my mistake when I think back with the original modifier, I might have forgotten to tick a merge tool in one of the first modifiers. So I'm just going to check. It's probably the vertexes that are near where these hexagons would have been joined together. So maybe this one. Yep. Okay, that's got the same problem. There. Okay, so I'll go into wireframe mode, just grab those two vertexes, Option M, merge at center, go back to shaded mode. So I'm guessing this one's probably got the same problem. Yep. So Z, wireframe, select, Option M, merge at center. This probably is the same. Let's have a look. Yep. Option M, merge at center. So that probably is the same down here. Yep. Merge at center, and I'll just spin around and have a look at the other side of the model, and I'm sure that these must have the same problem. Yeah, so I'll just go and repeat that operation for all of them. I just want to make sure that I only grab the vertexes that I want, because if I grab, for example, if I accidentally grab too many and hit Option M, merge at center, we're going to accidentally do some very strange things to our geometry, like what I just did here. So okay, I'll Command Z out of that, go back to wireframe, and just make sure I just grab the ones I want. Option M, merge at center, and let's assume that this is probably the same problem. Yep. Now just remember, when you press right click in the middle of an operation, it'll undo it before you've even engaged the operation. So it's a nice handy trick. Okay, so select both, Option M, merge at center. I think this one's, that one's okay. Okay, I'll just have a look if there's any other obvious points in the model where that might have happened. Maybe here. Yep. Yeah, so basically, when we were using modifiers with our ziggurat, I think I did use the merging option there, but it looks like when I made the Library of Babylon tutorial, I didn't tick a merging option. But okay, so at least we all get to fix it together. Okay, look, hopefully that's it. And now let's see how our UV unwrapping functions now. I'll just go back into look dev mode, so I've got my textures back. Now let's see if my UV welding works now. So if I grab this edge and press V, okay, so at least it's showing me what edge to merge, but there's another problem. What is the problem? So I'll grab this face. Which one are we looking at? Here. Now, what is the problem? I'll move it closer. Maybe we had a limit issue. Let's just grab the edge, press V. No. So what's our issue? Okay, I just need to turn the limits off. Okay. So, when you use an operation, it usually brings up some variables that you can change down the bottom, and I had use limits turned on, and that's why it wasn't stitching. So now that use limits is turned off, I press V here and then hit enter. Now it's starting to sew things together like we want. Okay, so now I've just sewn together this whole top shape. So if I grab it, you can see that all of that is now mapping the texture all together, which is exactly what we want. Okay, so now I'll just quickly run through and see if I can do the same thing for this bottom row. Now, I don't know if this row is in order, but hopefully, without too much stuffing around, we should be able to get them all joined up. Now, the other thing is, for these, there's quite a few faces that are reversed. You know, here we can see all the letters are backwards and so forth. So I'll just go back into face select mode. I just want to check, you know, I just want to make sure that my faces are all the right way around. That one's fine. Which one's this? Okay, this one's reversed. Okay, so I'm going to just go scale X minus 1. And now you can see that that's flipped the texture around and all the letters are facing the right way. So I just want to check that first. Okay, those letters are good. Oh, it must be around here somewhere. Where is this texture? Huh, that's interesting. Okay, here we are. Okay, so that's fine. Okay, that looks fine. Guessing that's around the other side. No, that one's reversed. Okay, so scale X minus 1. Now, how's this one? It's around here somewhere. Okay, that one's also... Oh, hold on, what have I done? Okay, so these two are already joined, and it looks like both of them are flipped because the letters are the wrong way around. So scale X minus 1. So now they're flipped over. What have we got going on here? We'll grab that. That looks good. The doorway. What's happening with the doorway? Doorway looks good. Now I should also be in island select mode rather than face. So that's why when I was grabbing this, I was only grabbing one face. Okay, whoop. Don't not want to move that. I want to move this. Where's this face? Okay, that's also reversed. So scale X minus 1. Better. What's happening here? That one's reversed. Scale X minus 1. And what have we got going on here? Where's this face? That's at the front here. That's fine. Where's this face? That's around the back somewhere. That looks reversed. Scale X minus 1. And what's going on here? Okay, that also looks good. So now it should be a little bit quicker and easier to sew these together. So I'll go back into edge mode and I'll just click on an edge, press V, and we've got, oh yeah, that's good, V and enter. Now I'll just go into 4 and grab this island and bring it out. And here I'll press V and enter, V and enter. I'll just grab this island, move it out of the way. Edge select, V, try this side, V and enter, V, what have we got? We've got another problem here. So which faces are we looking at now? Just want to check that I didn't miss any vertex problems before I go looking for another solution. No, it looks okay there. Aha! Vertex problem. I didn't merge the vertexes down here. So you can see how UV mapping really shows you where you've stuffed up. Okay, I'll grab these two. Option M, merge at center. And I'm going to take a guess that somewhere around here I stuffed up as well. Maybe that was the only one I missed. Let's see if we're lucky. Oops, I don't need rendered. Look dev is fine. A to select all the faces to get my UVs back. 2 to go back into edge select. And now if I press V, there we go. Okay, so, whoops, G, grab that, move it along. Let's just go V and enter, V and enter. Now key number 4 to grab this island and just move it across a bit so that we can see what we're doing. Key number 2 to be back in edge select, V and enter, V and enter. V and enter. Okay, so great, we're really getting through it now. No, I think that's it. Maybe one more. Okay, fantastic. So there is all of the outside, whoop, don't press V again, G. Now we have all of the outside faces mapped together. So that means if we're using something like a brick texture, all of these bricks will continue around the wall exactly like they should. So let's just fix up the doorway now. Remember, I put the doorway textures here. I'll just put them under the door, and yeah, I think they're facing the right way, but I want to rotate these ones here, so I'm not sure what rotation exactly they should be, but if I press R, I just want to have them nice and horizontal. Okay, great. Now, in terms of wrapping them, I think they're facing a good direction. If we see the way that the letters are facing, that's the same way I want the bricks to face. So I might just leave them as they are, because if you're building a brick wall, you wouldn't have the floor continuing the same direction as the wall. So I'm not going to stitch these together. I'm just going to leave them as they are, but I might just kind of pack them in to be a little bit more efficient. Okay, I'll just put them here. Okay, now I'll just repeat all of those steps for these internal walls. So I'll go into island select mode by pressing 4, and I might just grab all of these and bring them up to the party. Okay, that looks reversed, so scale X minus 1. That one, where's that one? That one looks fine. This one also looks good. And the one on the inside of the door is reversed, both here and here. So scale X minus 1, boom. Okay, so let's join them together. Edge select mode, key number 2 to bring that up. Grab that edge, V and enter. I'll just do this one, V and enter, V and enter, and that's it. Nice and quick. So now all the inside walls have their UVs joined together. Also, once you've got your UVs mapped like this, you can actually use kind of part of the UVs as animations as well. You can do all sorts of stuff if you've got controls over your UVs. So having a UV unwrapped model is really quite crucial to giving yourself full control over what you want to do with it animation wise. Okay, so let's grab, I don't think we need to do anything here. I'm just going to leave that as it is. Actually, no, I'm not. Because think about it. These bricks shouldn't all be connected this way. They should be connected to these walls. So I'm actually going to cut this up. So if I go into face mode and I press grab, see, these are all connected, but I don't want them to be connected. I want them to be separate. So I'm going to grab that face, and this time I'm going to press Y. And then I'll press grab again. And when I press Y, it means that I've sort of cut this face out. And I want to rotate it now 90 degrees because I want to stitch it on to the bottom of these walls. So if I hit R90, I rotated it the wrong way. So I'll just go R180, flip it around. 2 for edge select. Select that edge, V, and now it's connected to the bottom of one of these walls, which should mean that the bricks should map on in a much nicer direction. See what we did here now? We have this connection here, which I think should be closer to what we want the bricks to look like. Okay, so I'm just going to repeat that. I'll grab this face, press Y, G for grab. I'm just going to have to rotate it a bit arbitrarily till it's nice and flat. Give myself a bit more control. Yep. 2, V. Yep, that's fine. Now, let's grab this. 3 face mode. Y to separate. G for grab. Now, I'll just... what happens if I just... No, I don't want to do that. I'll just rotate this. Look, I'll just separate all of these first. Actually, that might be quicker and easier. YG, YG. Okay, so now if I go here, look, I know there's probably a quick way to make sure they snap to this island, but I can't remember it off the top of my head, and I'm just going to quickly rotate them. This one I can rotate by -90. Whoop, of course I got that wrong. 180, flip it around. This one I'll just rotate it again. That looks good. Okay, so now if I go into edge select mode, grab these edges, and let's just sew them all together. And this one. Okay, great. So now we've got all of these hexagonal faces now connecting the lines of our bricks, and I'll just sort out the final internal part of the chamber. Looks like we've got some rotated faces again, so I'll just work out which ones they are. That one I can see out of the corner of my eye looks okay. This one is backwards. Whoop. Let's undo whatever I did there. Scale X -1. Grab it. I'll just check I didn't extrude anything there, so I accidentally hit E. Nope, it's fine. Okay. A to get all the faces back. Now here, grab this one. They both look reversed to me. Whoop. So I'm in face select where I should be in island select. Now I've got both islands. Scale X -1. Grab it, bring it back up. That looks good. Okay, so let's just join these together. V and enter. Okay, great. So now we've got all those faces joined in there. Okay, that looks pretty good to me. Now, there's another way we could have done it, of course. I could have joined each one of these down here, but then I would have had to make a choice between, where do I have the warping? Do I have the warp, because this is not a square, so would I have my bricks shrink or not? And actually, looks like I've got a little bit of warping anyway. I think in my haste to stick these together, I've stuffed something up here a little bit, so I'm going to guess it's one of these faces. Let's see what's happening here. If I grab this on the x-axis, okay, that's better. Yeah, I can just see where I've warped that there. So I think that's making it a bit better. Here, let's do the same thing. Basically, I can just see that these shapes are not looking the way they now that's out of my camera view. Where are we? Okay. Yeah, because I could see that these shapes had sort of become more square instead of more trapezoidal, which means that some warping had occurred. And here you can see outside the door I've really stuffed that up and warped that. So this is a mistake is a good excuse to learn a new solution. So just grab these vertices and I'll press G, and on the x-axis I just want to slide them back to make that trapezoidal shape. I'll grab the other one and it should just bring those grid lines back to their regular squareness. There's another one that's stuffed up here around this K, L and B. Which one is it? Probably this one. Nope. Yep, this one. Okay. That's better. Okay, so are we done with UV unwrapping? Yeah, look, that's probably good enough. Maybe I'll bring this floor up, and maybe I'll just have the floor in the same orientation to these two pieces from the top. And there's a bunch of ways to pack all these islands in. I'm just going to do it manually, but I think we can do something like UV pack islands, but we don't want them to rotate like they've just done here, so turn off rotate, and what kind of packing has it done? Not too bad actually, yeah. But look, I'm not going to pack them at the moment. I'll just undo that. I just want to keep them in this super organized state right now, just because right now it gives us a bit more control over what we're doing. The reason you pack UV islands is that what's called the texture space, which is this space in here, the resolution of the texture that we use will always be limited, because we're drawing this texture from an image. So you always want to use the image space as efficiently as possible. That's why the islands get packed in like that. But anyhow, so you can see now that we've sort of scaled them back down, that the scale of the image texture as applied to our model is changing. But don't worry about that. There's another way that we can change that back when we're doing our texturing. So I'll show you that now. So we're almost at the end here. I'm going to go back into my shading panel, and I'm going to get rid of this material and finally make that brick material that you saw me using before. Okay, so I'll add a new material, and this time I'm going to use a few shortcuts. I'm just going to search in here image to bring up an image texture, but I'm also going to add a few more things just so that we have the scale right. I'll show you what happens without the scale. If I just open, I'm going to go into my folder where I've kept my textures, and I'm going to use COL. Here stands for color, and I'll use the color texture. So I'll show you what all these textures are. These are all just different parts of like a comprehensive shader setup. But the simple one we're using here, the color texture, is just a photograph of the brick wall that's been made as a looping repeat, so that if you connect these together, or connect multiple versions of these bricks together, that you won't see the seam. Again, like wallpaper, or exactly like we did with the Borges library. But okay, I'll open that image, and before I change the scale of how the image is mapped, I'll just connect the color directly here to the base color. And okay, so we've got our bricks on there, happy days, but gosh, they're big bricks. They're huge. So so instead, I'm going to change the scale that our texture is applied to the model. So to do that, I'm just going to add in a UV map here, and I'll choose UV map from the selector there. And what that's doing is that's just, there's only one UV map for this object, which is the one that we just made. I've got proportional editing turned on for some reason. No, where's my proportional editing toggle? Okay. Oh no, I'm in texture paint, that's why. Okay. So yeah, when we made that UV map, this is the UV map we made. So now that I go back into shading, if I select UV map here, that's just the map we've already made. And I'm also going to put in a mapping node. And what these are going to do, that's simply going to give us the ability to change the size of the UV map relative to the texture. And that's super important because we don't want to have gigantic bricks here. So I'm just going to connect UV to vector and vector to vector. So now, if I change these scale numbers here, let's put them at 5, all of a sudden the bricks are a whole lot smaller, and we can see which way they're facing. And yeah, look, I'm sure there's some stuff we could do better, but it looks pretty cool, The direction of the bricks seems to be moderately logical. I'm sure I could probably do something a little bit smarter with the top here, but, if we were going to make our own customized texture, we might put something completely different on the top anyway. But okay. Oh, and another change that if you were doing this with a bit more finesse, we'd probably get rid of these really sharp edges. We'd probably round them out a bit. For example, if I grabbed an edge here, go into edge select mode, and bring up my tool menu, I'd probably grab bevel. I probably would have done this before we started UV mapping, but I'll probably smooth out that edge a bit so that it's not so insanely sharp. Okay, and you can see that that softness looks a little bit more realistic than this kind of hard edge that you see there. But anyway, this is just getting the basics of texturing so that you can see it. So, this looks pretty good, but we can make it look better. So there's a few other maps that I'll show you how to apply. One of the most interesting ones, is called a normal map. And I'll show you what a normal map does. So I'm going to add another image texture, image texture. I'll pop it here. I'll just give myself a little bit more space. And I'm also going to add in normal map and pop that there. And you think, what the hell is a normal map? Well, I'll actually open it up and show you. So go back into my textures. This thing here is a normal map, this purple looking thing. And again, I'll put some open source textures into the Moodle for you to use, and you can open up the normal map and have a look at it. But it's basically a way of faking extra detail, and I'll show you how it works. First thing we have to do is change the color space here to non-color data and connect the color to the color input of the normal map, and then connect normal to normal. And now, whoops, oh, we made an interesting mistake. Okay, so one thing I forgot to do is you'll probably see some bumps occurring on the model, but they're in really dumb places. See, you can just see, maybe if I go into, I am in rendered mode, you can see that there are bumps of bricks, but they're the big bricks. And because I didn't connect this UV mapping node to the vector. So now if I change this, all of a sudden our fake bricky texture is more in position. And if I turn this up and down, you should be able to see what's happening. See how it's kind of adding in this, you can see it really on this face here as I turn this slider up and down. It almost looks like there's more geometry there. We can start to see a bumpiness on the bricks, but we're not adding in any geometry at all. We're just tricking the computer by telling it that light should bounce off it as if there were actual cracks here in the bricks. And when we render this, we'll really see it. So I'll just leave the strength of that at 1, and I'll add one more map because this new principled BDSF shader is great. It's got all these preset slots here that we can add all sorts of stuff in to get really quite realistic models in without doing much hard work at all. So I'll add one more in. I'll add in another image texture, and this time I'm going to remember to connect it to the vector to vector, and I'll open another image, go back to my image folder, and this time I'm going to I'll go back to the name view, I'm going to open the gloss texture. Okay, and I will connect the color, in this case, to the roughness. So the roughness is what we used before to make our model more shiny, but now that we've got a texture that is specifically made for these bricks, it knows where to put the shininess on each brick. It's very, very cool. So now we're really getting the idea of there being each individual brick having its own reflections, and we're getting quite a beautiful and realistic textured model. So now if we go back to the animation tab and render this out, I'll leave it in Eevee. Let's see what we get. Render image. Okay, great. So see, we're still in Eevee, so we're still in the real-time renderer, but there's a huge amount, it's such a more beautiful image already that we can see, the bumpy textures on some of these bricks and the reflections on the bricks. It's already looking pretty nice. The only thing I'd criticize is that obviously the lighting is a bit washed out, our shadows are not very strong, etc. But when we do a lighting tutorial, I'll show you a bunch of ways to fix that. Let's just do a quick render in cycles. Hold on, I should save that render, and so we can compare, we can see the difference. So, okay, let's put, that's in slot 3. So let's go into slot 4, and now I'll do a render in cycles. We'll see what it looks like, see what the difference is. Might just turn off rendered mode here and go into render image. This might take a second. Okay, so I just skipped part of the video to save on that render time, and so you didn't have to watch my computer render. But okay, so this is the rendered version that we've got from Eevee, and you can already see that because Eevee does sort of real-time, what's called real-time, ray traced calculations, it's put a whole lot more kind of extra, what we call like occluded shadows in here that naturally, because this is the outside and this is the inside, we've got quite a beautifully rendered shadow here. If we go back to slot 3, we'll see that you know, that sophisticated lighting calculation is not present, whereas within cycles, you know, there's quite a lot more happening with the way the lighting has been calculated. But okay, I think that's enough for our texturing tutorial. So in this tutorial, I've shown you the basics of how to just apply a color to an image and render it out. And now I've shown you how to comprehensively UV unwrap a model so that you can control its textures and apply them to a model. And I will upload some textures to the Moodle for you guys to experiment with. And then I'll make a new video where I show you how to, instead of rendering out a still image, render out an animation. But that's enough for this tutorial. Okay, thanks a lot, guys. Bye-bye.